Thank you all for attending today's special edition of Indexer Office Hours. I'm very excited to cover today's topics. Today will be all about the MIPs program and a new indexer orientation. So, what do we have in the agenda? If you could head to the next slide, that would be amazing, Chris. We're going to talk all about what indexers do in the graph network, why they're important, the benefits of being an indexer starting requirements, a MIPS program overview, and then we're going to talk about the path forward for many of you who have joined us today. Okay, next slide. Perfect. So what do indexers do at the graph? So this is a list of all participants that play a crucial role in the graph network, and each of them are integral to the success of the network. But for the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to be focused on the indexer. So if you want to head over to the next slide, Chris, I can tell people a bit more about what the indexer role is about. So indexers are effectively node operators in the graph network. They stake graph tokens, GRT, in order to provide indexing and query processing services. And for their services, indexers earn query fees, indexing rewards. And so to dive a bit deeper into how that works, you have curators, which are another participant in the ecosystem, and they stake GRT in order to indicate which subgraphs are high quality. And then the indexers come along and they find the highest signal subgraphs, index those, ready for data consumers to ping those subgraphs to get data. And something to keep in mind as an indexer is the stake that you put up can be subject to slashing if you behave in a malicious way or serve incorrect data to applications. If you're really good at what you do and you're successful, you can attract more GRT from delegates to grow your indexer operation. So that's the general gist about what indexers do in the network. So if you want to head to the next slide. Now, the question you might be asking yourself is, why are indexers so important to the ecosystem? So the core value proposition of the graph is that it's an indexing protocol for querying decentralized networks. And I want to emphasize the word indexing, because that's what many of the folks on the call are doing. And I hope many of you new and aspiring indexers will soon be doing, is you're taking specific blockchain data, organizing it, and making it easily indexable for developers to use, which means that you're the backbone of the graph network, right? Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to serve blockchain data to consumers. And because the graph network is so large and a fundamental piece of the Web3 stack, you're also the backbone of Web3. And as the famous saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. And we'll dive deeper into what those responsibilities are as we cover the requirements in the later part of this presentation. Next slide. So hopefully by this point, you have some level of understanding of what indexers do and why they're important. And so the question you might be asking yourself is, what are the benefits of becoming an indexer? So for the first point, you can look at it in two ways. The first is, if you're someone who has data infrastructure experience and you're looking for an opportunity to grow your skill set, being an indexer is a great way to deepen your knowledge in this area. Unlike other node operation opportunities, being an indexer requires some serious DevOps skills. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll discuss that later in the requirements section. On the other hand, if you're running a data infrastructure business and perhaps you're running nodes in other networks, then this is a new network that you can participate in and add an additional revenue stream. And the real value of being an indexer is you can focus on running the best setup, right? Making the improvements that you deem make sense, and then reap the rewards by plugging into an already existing large flow of demand, which leads me on to the next point, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the graph is such a foundational piece of the Web3 stack and is at such scale that you'd be a real player in the Web3 ecosystem by being an indexer in the graph protocol. And then finally, if you are looking for the highest leverage way to generate a return on GRT and you're long-term bullish on the graph ecosystem, then I can't think of a better way to gain a return on your GRT position. And that is if you perform well. Next slide. So hopefully we've whet your appetite and got you interested in potentially becoming an indexer in the graph network. So you may be asking yourself, how do I do this? And for this, I'll hand it over to Anna, who's going to take us into how to do this.
Thank you, 𝗨𝗲𝗂, and hello, everyone. Okay, so you've decided that you want to become an indexer. So how do you start? When thinking of becoming an indexer, there are three areas you need to keep in mind. So the hardware, the infrastructure that you will be running software on, the software components, and then the day-to-day operations and management of your indexer. You should start small, get your indexer up and running, and then scale as you can. So if we think of a small indexing operation defined as running exactly one server as a starting point, and this server can either be provisioned with a cloud provider, a dedicated bare metal server that you've set up yourself, or it could be managed, a different managed provider. The components needed for the one server to run, so the bare minimum indexing operation, are a graph node, a Postgres database, Ethereum node, an indexer service, an indexer agent, and additional tooling that can help you monitor the state of your indexer, and just to give you peace of mind in general. So before we delve into the software components and how they relate to each other and why you need all of them, let's quickly touch on the hardware requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, so the minimum hardware requirement to start indexing is, as I said, one server with 8 CPU cores, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the minimum of 2 terabytes SSD or NVMe drive. This will be enough for an indexer to start indexing one chain, and in order to participate into the MIPS program, you can only you can choose to only index one chain, but of course, feel free to index all of them if you can and as they become available. Now, a natural question is, how much is this going to cost me? As you can see on this slide, there is an estimated cost. However, this comes with a warning. The warning is that it's impossible to give an accurate hardware cost, as it will massively depend on the cloud provider you pick, or the dedicated server if you've created your own, as well as the region where you plan to host your server in. However, a very conservative hardware estimate based on an average between 5 different providers, so this is the average between the cheapest and the most expensive provider for running one server per month, is $500. What that means is that depending on what you pick, this hardware cost might be a lot higher or might be a lot smaller. But if you plan to spend $500, I think that would be a good enough way of planning your cost. So again, this includes monthly cost of required indexer software, as well as costs for running Ethereum archival nodes. But this does not include Ethereum gas fees, which we'll talk about later. So before we move on, a very important point to make is that the region you decide to host your servers in will impact the number of queries you get, because of the gateway selection algorithm, which will take into consideration your indexing location for optimal network latency. So whilst you might be tempted to go with the cheapest region for your server, that might not necessarily give you an edge as an indexer. So instead, you should try to pick a location that is different from the location other indexers host their servers in. Next slide, please. All right, so we've started with one server, and so far, let's assume that everything is running great, and therefore it's only natural that you want to scale your indexing operation. Now, this diagram is for visualization only. Nobody is suggesting that you'll have to run your own physical servers. You can if you want to, but it is more likely that your visualization will still be similar to the first diagram, which was the small indexing diagram, if you're running on cloud servers. So you have decided to scale your indexing operation. There's two ways of scaling. You can either scale vertically, and what that means is add more compute and more disks to your one server, or you can scale horizontally, which means you would add more servers into your setup and leave your current server as is. And then you'd orchestrate your new servers to work as a cluster with all of the other ones. We recommend scaling horizontally for various reasons, one of them being because you should aim to, at some point, support index more than one chain, and also because having more than one server, it's better for availability and reliability. So there are different ways to, next slide, please. So we talked about how your setup should look like. Now, you've seen the different components that you need to run, but we wouldn't expect you to be able to orchestrate them all from scratch. There are a bunch of tooling already available to orchestrate your indexer stack, and it will be up to you to decide the one that you want to use. So let's quickly go through them. First one is the Docker Compose setup that 𝗨𝘀𝗃𝗀 has created and maintained for a while now. This is a tried and tested setup. Currently, quite a few indexers rely on this setup. However, it does have a constraint. The constraint is that you can only scale vertically because it assumes only one server. Then the next setup is the Kubernetes Launchpad that myself and the team of 𝗨𝗂𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀 have been working on furiously for the last few months. We have included a link into this presentation. However, it's not full. It hasn't been fully tested by other indexers, so it's coming very, very soon. Now, the Kubernetes Launchpad will allow you to test vertically. Will allow you to scale horizontally. So what that means is that you'll be able to add as many servers as you want into this setup to increase from one server to many, from one chain to many, and it's fully automated, and it's from specifying one IP address all the way to creating a Kubernetes cluster that will be in charge of managing and deploying your different indexing software components. Then there is the bare metal install suite from Mind, Heart, Soul. This contains a list of individual install scripts of the different indexer software components that have been written specifically for bare metal servers. And the final one is the Ansible install suite from Steak Machine. So this is a collection of Ansible playbooks and roles to operate the graph indexer infrastructure. It will be completely up to you which one of these do you pick to run. Do you pick to orchestrate your indexer stack? Of course, you have the option to create your own setup, but unless you're very experienced in being a sysadmin, or on SRE, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've talked about a bit about the software components. Let's actually fully walk through how everything works together. So let's begin by looking at the indexer operator, which is in the middle of the diagram. So to interact with the orchestrate indexer stack, the indexer will use the indexer CLI to instruct the indexer agent on which subgraphs to allocate to, as well as their cost models, and all of these details would be stored in the Postgres indexer database. Here, the indexer agent will interact with the graph protocol by transacting on the Ethereum blockchain and will ask the graph node or indexer node in this diagram to begin indexing the subgraphs. The indexer node, the index node, would pull raw data from the blockchain node based on subgraph specification, and it will also run the subgraph mapping to generate index data. The index node would then store index data into a Postgres subgraph database, and at this point, the subgraph data is indexed and available for querying. From the other side, so consumer perspective, when a consumer wants to get data from blockchain, they issue a query against a gateway. The gateways are responsible for indexer selection based on a wide array of factors, and those factors include consumer price preferences, indexer cost models, and latency performance. So once the gateway has selected which indexer the consumer query will be processed by, that query flows to that indexer service, which stores the payment receipt into the indexer database and then sends the query onto a query node. Here, the query node translates GraphQL into SQL, into an SQL query, and that query is processed by the Postgres subgraph database to fetch the query results. The query node then formats the data as a GraphQL response, and it flows back through the indexer service to the gateway and onto the consumer. The gateway at this point records the indexer performance to help with future indexer selection decisions. So I hope this helps you all to how to think of how data flows through the graph protocol indexer stack and why you need all of the different components. Next slide, please. Okay, so besides hardware costs, so hardware and software, we also have day-to-day operations that indexers need to keep in mind. So there is a minimum time commitment of 5 hours per week that indexer participating in the MIPs programs will have to commit to, and this is for program activities and for testing, in addition to maintaining your indexer stack. Then there's the ongoing cost management that you have to take into account. Chances are you'll always be looking at ways to make your cost more efficient. And the cost management, as mentioned before, includes the hardware cost. Here again, geography matters. And then it also includes Ethereum gas fees. Then another important considerant is how do you assess progress as an indexer? How do you compare yourself and your performance to other indexers? And Pedro will cover some of this as a lot of the, as the MIPS program is set up to be gamified with a lot of challenges. One other thing that will be needed from indexers participating in this program is the ongoing bug reporting. Next slide, please. Okay, I will hand over to Abel for additional support and resources.
Yes, thank you so much. So how I can break this down into three sections. So the first is IOH. You guys are all here right now. It's a weekly gathering, usually hosted in the Graph Protocol Discord and happening every Tuesday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. UTC. At IOH, we get together some of the most active indexes in the ecosystem to discuss the latest protocol developments, as well as upgrades to the most important repos that are relevant for indexers. And we're really fortunate to be working alongside some of the most talented developers and researchers in the Web3 space. And so usually we have a fireside chat or an open discussion with a guest from the Graph ecosystem to speak about relevant topics in the Graph ecosystem. So if you want to stay in the loop, particularly in this time where many of you are going to be in the MIPS program, then I would highly recommend attending IOH sessions regularly. You can go to the Discord to see when the next one is. And speaking of the Discord, that is a place that has a wealth of knowledge. It's very active and is a fantastic way to keep up to date with the latest developments in the ecosystem and ask many questions, any questions that you have, whether they be related to your new indexer setup or the MIPS program. And finally, as we alluded to earlier in the presentation, there is the Launchpad, and we will be doing workshops on that stack. So keep your eyes peeled on the Discord for that. Next slide. And now I'll hand over to Pedro, who's going to tell us all about the MIPS program.
All right. Thank you all. Yes, thanks. That's the right slide. Okay. It's been a while since I've joined these calls, actually. So I want to take the opportunity to say that GraphOps is doing an amazing job with these calls. And I'm super happy to see new community members joining us for sure and actively participating in the protocol. I do highly recommend you to attend these future calls, these indexer office hours. They're super helpful. You can, as Abel and Anna have been mentioning, you can use these calls to ask questions. Okay, what is this MIPS? So, well, you know, we are the Graph. We're pretty serious about decentralization. I think it's a known fact, it's a well-known fact. For these reasons, you might have also seen that we are deprecating the hosted service, which is the centralized and free service that most subgraph developers use and love. And when compared to the decentralized network, the hosted service can support more than 20 different chains, whereas on the decentralized network, we have only Ethereum mainnet. That's been the case until recently. Now we have the means to add more chains. And so the hosted service will go away, as you might have seen in our blog. If you don't, I also recommend you go in and read that blog post. And so in about 9 months from now, it should be fully deprecated. But that doesn't mean that we will stop supporting these different chains. And so, yeah, we now have the means to support all of these in the decentralized network, and MIPS is essentially a complementary program put together by the foundation and core devs, essentially to bootstrap these chains and indexer supply, particularly good indexers serving consumers and developers. More on what this means later on about the quality of service. Okay, so let's start with the incentives. You might have seen this as well in the announcement. Yeah, the foundation has allocated 50 million GRT for indexers. That's about 0.5% of GRT supply, but also 25 million GRT for migration grants. This specifically means, helping out protocol teams and dApp developers and subgraph developers to migrate those subgraphs that have been previously published to the hosted service, now to the decentralized network. That's what drives value in the network. That's how indexers will serve data and get query fees, indexing rewards. So we're happy to help people migrate over. So that's the incentives. Still on the incentives, the breakdown, how are we going to do this? Well, essentially, the actual allocation per chain will be announced midway through this cycle, and you will understand what this cycle is in a bit. Essentially, we will be testing things on the testnet, and once we're ready to migrate that chain or fully support that chain on the decentralized network, that's when we will give you what the percentage of this 50 million GRT is for that particular chain. I have a diagram in a couple of slides. I'll probably explain this a little bit better with some visual aid. So let's keep on. I'm going to talk about the rest. Yeah, thanks. And so still on the breakdown and the distribution of GRT, for indexers, we're going to do it at the end of each chain cycle. So there's going to be a leaderboard. It's essentially a gamified system. And this leaderboard will be scoring indexers on, for instance, allocation efficiency, like, for instance, monitoring stuff like the 𝗨𝗪𝗂𝗪𝗂𝗪𝗂𝗪𝗂 rebates, which would be a good indicator that you guys are allocating properly, and that's healthy for the overall network. This might sound too complex, but that's why we'll have more workshops on these things. And so this leaderboard will keep track of on-chain things, but also off-chain. Particularly on off-chain, we're going to be monitoring quality of service, specifically performance metrics like latency, success rate, data freshness, that is how many blocks behind you actually are, so that you can serve the most updated data, let's say. And more than that, we'll also be keeping an eye on how you guys manage and just participate in the program. You know, like if you're helping each other out, if you're writing docs or writing tutorials or whatever it might be in the forum or in our Discord, we'll also take that into account for sure, because that's nice and healthy, I would say. And also new tooling. You will know some nice tooling that GraphOps and other core devs have been working on, which we didn't really have before, and makes the whole indexer experience a lot better, a lot easier to manage. So yeah, I will show a diagram later on that I can refer to. So chains. So we're going to be announcing any new chain with 2 weeks notice. So let's say the first one, as you know, is going to be Gnosis chain. And so once we kick off the program and we get you guys participating, you folks, you are participating, you're joining the network, you're successfully serving Gnosis, we will then let you know what will be the next chain. And we're going to have a process for this as well. I will update you in a couple of days. I think we'll write a forum post on this, but anyone can then submit a GIP and propose a new chain. And what we'll do is let you know with 2 weeks notice so that you can prepare your infrastructure, start syncing that particular, that new chain or that new archive node. And yeah, so I don't know who's controlling the screen. I think it's Chris. Chris, if you want to fast, yeah, just go on. Oh, actually, can you go one more, please? Might as well do the diagram first. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so this explains, or should explain, how things will play out. Again, this is heavily focused on making sure that we can support a new chain properly. And we're going to be using the new testnet that's based on 𝗏𝗏 to have MIPS participants or these new indexers joining us. And the way we will do it is we will just inject some traffic onto this network. We're going to be monitoring the quality of service. That is how participants are serving this test traffic, let's say. And once we are comfortable with the QoS, and once we once we have, like, let's say, a nice set of indexers already serving the network with a good quality of service, that's when we will be proposing migrating things to mainnet, that is the decentralized network. We will still be monitoring QoS over there for a couple of days, maybe 1-2 weeks, and that's when this cycle will end, and that's when we will be distributing rewards to participants. So depending on how you score, on how you serve this chain, and how you engage with the program, we will be distributing GRT by the end of that chain. So as I mentioned, it's how can I say it? So it's like we will be migrating chains on a rolling basis. So we will be repeating this every time we'll be supporting a new chain. And so participants can always decide if they want to index, let's say, noses, if they want to serve whatever other chain we may have in the future. You can choose which one you will be supporting, and we will just be monitoring things. And by the end of that cycle, we will figure out how much GRT you are entitled to based on your participation. As optional, as you see there, as you know, the protocol itself lives on Ethereum mainnet. And we're in the process of migrating to an L2, specifically Arbitrum, that's in the works, as many of you know. And so one of the things we'll also be asking you to engage with is testing this new L2. Because there's a bridge in there, so we want to make sure that everything is safe, that you understand the whole experience and all of that. So everything that you see under optional are like extra points we'll take into account. It's not mandatory, but if you do so, that's nice, and you will be compensated for it. The same thing goes for what we're calling here automating indexer experience and profit maximization. That's essentially the new tooling I was referring to. Stuff like 𝗨𝗀𝗪𝗀𝗀𝗪, which is a solution to automate cost modeling, and also the allocation optimizer as an example. We will be sharing all of this in the forum during future Indexer office hours, so you know which ones we would like to get more user feedback on. Okay, I think I got to speed up. Chris, do you want to go back to the? Okay, thanks. So final thing from my side, the application process, quick overview. You probably know this already. You can check it on our blog post as well. You can apply via Typeform. You then need to KYC. And now, fair warning, some folks have already reached out asking if they need to KYC again, because they've already done so during the last testnet or the last incentivized testnet. And the reason is, unfortunately, yes, you do have to register again and go through this process. So kindly ask you folks to do it ASAP. And then the third step would be for you to sign an agreement, assuming that you do pass KYC. This agreement should be sent by the second week of September. That's what we're aiming for. And the last and final step would be the kickoff call, where we can kickstart the program and, well, just have some fun. And then multi-chain, quick information as well on the multi-chain. We will be helping out with sharing snapshots so that you can sync faster. You know, as I mentioned, we're going to be notifying you with 2 weeks notice that we're going to support a new chain so that you can ramp up your servers or whatever it might be. But we will also be sharing some snapshots you can use to just sync faster, basically. And then obviously we'll be helping out with proper docs on how to run that chain's particular set of clients. Could be execution client, could be consensus client. And GraphOps have also been doing a great job on creating dedicated Elm charts for some of these. And so, yeah, we will also be helping out with this with proper docs. If you want to reach out to and ask questions regarding contracts, KYC, payments, feel free to reach out via email using info@thegraph.foundation, or just reach out to Alex Marsh on Discord. You can see on the slide her username. On the technical I would say Ford, Ariel, I don't want to name people that are not on the call, but Ford, Ariel, GraphOps in general, all of these folks that are on this call. And yeah, I can also help or try to. Ford is usually online, so he can help you out. That's a joke, by the way. Okay, that's been it, I think.
If you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. Perfect. So now you may all be wondering, what are the next steps from this point forward? And we have a few suggested next steps. So for those of you who are aspiring and new indexers, we will be rolling out a new edition of Indexer office hours, catering to all of you folks. And it will be a more support-focused office hours where you can come with your questions, whether they be technical in nature or otherwise, and just be amongst people who are already in the ecosystem indexing at a very high level and ask away. And then for any of you who are currently indexers or even the new indexers and aspiring indexers, we encourage you to apply for the MIPs program, as you've just heard about from Pedro. And the link is in the presentation. We'll distribute the link to many of you across Discord and other platforms as well. So before we go into the next slide, which is going to be Q&A, I would like to pause and say that we want to recognize your attendance today and perhaps award you with a POAP. And so if you have a Discord name and you're already in the Graph Discord, could you please post that in the chat if you have the capability to do so? And then we'll try and get you a POAP rewarded retroactively. So you should have the capability to post in the chat. If not, we'll see if we can try to get that enabled.
Yeah, I'm enabling it right now. So just give me a second.
Perfect.
I think you should be able to now.
All right, people, do you want to try? Yeah, fantastic. I can see some coming through. Yeah, so just keep them coming. We'll make sure that we get this noted down, and we'll try and get you a POAP rewarded retroactively. So as people are doing that, Chris, if you want to head to the next slide, we are at the Q&A section. So with that, I want to thank every single person who is here and attended, and all of the participants who have shared information in this presentation. Let's open up for Q&A.